What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Big Six Podcast, CBS Sports Daily NFL Podcast. I'm Will Brinson. I'm your host, and this is the Black Monday Early Reaction Show on YouTube. We are live on YouTube, youtube.com/pick6. Of course, like the video if you are in there. If you're in the chat, say what's up. Feel free to drop comments, questions, remarks. Debo joining me on this lovely day. You can see Debo on the YouTube if you want to get a glimpse of early morning or lack of sleep Debo and lack of sleep Brinson. Check out YouTube. Also, if you're listening on Spotify, leave a 5-star rating. Lots of coaches fired on Monday morning. 6 openings across the NFL. The biggest shocker, of course, Brian Flores, the 40-year-old Miami Dolphins coach who went 24-25 in 3 seasons as the Dolphins head coach, was let go after going 10-6 in 2020 and 9-8 in 2021. Of course, they did not make the playoffs and have had just one playoff appearance since Stephen Ross bought the team back in 2009. Flores is the winningest coach in that time span. They're winning 49% of his games and going. The Dolphins have had since 2002 so that's 20 years. 7 winning seasons, 7 seasons above 500, not 500, but above 500. Brian Flores was the architect of 2 of those, and they came in the most recent years. This is the first back-to-back winning seasons since 2002 and 2003, I believe, for the Dolphins. And it was, let me confirm that. Yep, since 2002 and 2003. Just to let you know how long ago that was, Dave Wannstedt and Ricky Williams were the key figures in the Dolphins back in 2002.
Or the quarter, like Jay Fiedler, maybe?
That sounds, Jay Fiedler. That's correct.
There we go.
Was he? Oh yeah. What's up, Debo? How you doing, buddy?
I'm great. I'm sure you had a fantastic intro and are talking about the biggest surprise of the morning by far, right?
Brian Flores, of course. Also, Brian Flores, this is the biggest start. I guess I wasn't that surprised that they were going to fire him in the sense that it felt, when they were 1-7, I think they were 1-7. They lost 7 straight games. First team to ever lose 7 straight games and then win 7 straight games in NFL history. Certainly the first team to ever lose 7 straight, win 7 straight, and then fire their head coach. Brian Flores, this is the biggest shocker to me. Not that he was fired. It felt like in the middle of that losing streak that he might get fired. 2 weeks ago, he was a Coach of the Year candidate. And not only did he sweep Bill Belichick and the Patriots this year, he went 4-2 in 3 years against the Patriots. Like, that's the whole job, man. You come to South Beach, you go to the Jets, you go to the Bills. You just got to beat the Patriots. And I get that Tom Brady wasn't there for 2 of those years, but what more could you possibly want from the Dolphins? Now, maybe this is smoke and mirrors. I call them frauds all along because they were beating up on bad teams. Yeah, and that's okay. They ended up being, they weren't a playoff caliber team. They took a little bit of a step back in terms of their win total. They took a little bit of a step back from that 10-win season last year. That was probably going to happen no matter what. So I think 2 things have to be, it has to be one of 2 things here, Debo. And I'm curious what you think is more likely. One, that Jim Harbaugh is in Stephen Ross's back pocket. And that seems less likely now that he commented and said he won't be the guy to hire him away from Michigan. So throw that theory out the window, I guess, which means it's the only other thing that's possible is that there is a power struggle between GM Chris Greer, who is not being fired, and Brian Flores, who is fired. And that Stephen Ross, as many naive billionaires who run football teams often find themselves, basically got hoodwinked by the GM, who he spends more time talking to than the head coach. And there is a belief, I think, around the league that Flores was not a huge fan of Tua Tagovailoa. Greer was, key in drafting him. And so you're probably going to see a focus on finding a coach who is very intrigued by Tua, which, I guess good luck. Since with the Harbaugh, don't you think that's the only possible explanation for this?
I think you narrowed it down. Yeah, there was all the speculation for the past couple of weeks that it would be a Harbaugh thing. And I just want to bring up, it's great when we hear from reporters, but I always kind of put added weight to former players that are in the media now that say something along those lines. And I just want to show Darius Butler, former player in the media, man-to-man pod, has these types of connections. And when someone like that, like when our guy BMAC says something attached to someone in the league, I tend to trust it because they're very close to the
there's no agenda there.
Right.
Like
right.
Darius Butler's not being fed information by Chris Greer, you know?
No, there's not this source guessing that we sometimes might do with others. We're not having that agenda here. So it says, for those listening on the podcast, according to my sources in Miami, there was tension all year between GM Greer and head coach Flores. GM Chris Greer had been a part of the Dolphins organization for more than 20 years. One or both had to go. Now, others reporting this as well, but when it comes from a place like this, tend to believe it. And you're right. From coach of the year candidate, we were talking about him 60-1. Did you get that bet in, Will?
I did not bet on
Brian Flores. Wise.
Yeah, pretty glad. Yeah,
probably. What were the odds last night that we would have had him to be fired this morning? 20-1. It wasn't 60-1, but still super unlikely. One of the more unlikely Black Monday firings I can remember on Monday in the past couple of years.
I would say it's extremely unlikely firing. If you told me that a head coach in his third year had a winning record, went to any AFC East team other than the Patriots, and had a winning record in 2 of 3 years, but didn't make the playoffs, it's okay. Look, I mean, 10-6, 9-8. Had a young quarterback who was starting to show some promise, and had swept Bill Belichick and went 4-2 against Belichick. I would expect that he would be getting a contract extension, not that he would be fired. The Darius Butler thing, like I said, and I hadn't even seen that tweet. I agree with you. Like, that's seeing that from a former player who's in the media but still talks to a lot of these players. Like if you're 2 or 3 years removed from the league, which I think Darius Butler is, yeah. I mean, you got a lot of friends around the league. Like you know people in organizations, and a lot of those dudes you played with end up going, to go on to coach. Like, so like it's that information is probably pretty accurate, is what I'm saying, and I agree with you.
And ultimately, I think it comes down when you just look at the owner. And we talk about Stephen Ross becoming the majority owner in 2009, one playoff appearance since then. That's all it is. If there was one playoff appearance in the past 3 years for Brian Flores, he's put up a decent record, one game below 500, but one playoff appearance, even if it was in year 1 or year 2 and not this year, I think that changes things. But these owners get greedy and rightfully so, but they don't like that stat of one playoff appearance in the past 12 seasons, just 2 playoff appearances for the franchise in the past 20 years. That's the difference here.
Hey, toss that Butler tweet up again, because I want to point something out, if you don't mind.
I am doing that now.
So in his tweet, he noted that Chris Greer, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. Oh yeah, Chris Greer, the second part of it. GM Chris Greer has been part of the Dolphins organization for more than 20 years. So Stephen Ross bought the Dolphins in 2009. Do you think that you should keep, here's my thing. Should you keep the guy who's new and winning, or keep the guy who's been in the crappy organization for a really long time? I mean, why? Maybe Stephen Ross needs to look internally, because it's probably more likely that this team and this franchise can't win. You look around at all these franchises that stink, and there is a common theme. Ownership doesn't know what it's doing. Like, look at we talk about the Lions and the Bears and the Dolphins. It's like these owners bring in these people, these people who are very good office politicians. And there's a belief too. You can take it down if you want. There's a belief too that Brian Flores sort of, not that he rocked the boat, just that he's probably not very good in an office setting. And that's not what a head coach is supposed to do. Like a head coach is supposed to win football games. You're not supposed to be an office politician.
He's not a schmoozer like Will Brinson, we could say.
I turned down my volume on my dunk button. I actually think I'm kind of bad at office politics too. I'm a schmoozer, don't get me wrong, but I it's just stuff will come out of my mouth that is not sometimes.
Fair enough. Well, in that tweet, Butler said, one or both had to go. It could have been both. It seems like Flores was going to be the decision, but then Greer's the one making this decision to remove him, and his job maybe not in jeopardy at all.
Here's something else. Owner Stephen Ross states he has, quote, no plans to pursue Deshaun Watson. So no Deshaun Watson, no Jim Harbaugh. If you're a Dolphins fan,
it's a bad morning.
Yeah. You wake up thinking, okay,
beat the Patriots, fell short of the playoffs, but ended the season on a high note.
Week 1 in week 18, you beat the Patriots and you finish with 9 wins. Sure, some of them against bad teams, and it wasn't a great season, but we're this close to the playoffs. Next year, to his 3rd season, maybe we can finally take this big step forward. And now you're quasi rebooting. It doesn't make much sense.
And William Hill, their over under preseason for the Dolphins was 9 wins. So in that sense, you met expectations. You fell short of the playoffs. I think 9-8, even with 7 teams, you don't expect to get into the playoffs, but they were right on par with, I think, what people expected. Now, fans probably expected a little bit more of a leap in year 2 from Tua, but we saw glimpses of that. But now no Deshaun, no Harbaugh, no Brian Flores. Who do they look after? I think it's clear when we talk about some of these other positions that Flores is immediately a head coach candidate for
absolutely
these other vacancies. He will get brought up. He will get interviewed. He probably will get hired by one of these teams. But who is on your short list for the Dolphins?
I would say that it's tough, man, because if I'm a head coaching candidate with, let's say that I'm Doug Peterson. And I don't think that Doug Peterson is the top head coaching candidate, but Doug Peterson is number one. It might be for some people. He has a Super Bowl ring. He has a good resume. He did the Mike McCarthy thing where he takes a year off and we'll have some sort of off, at some point in the next few days, like a Doug Peterson looked deep inside his soul this offseason and realized it was all Howie Roseman's fault. And then he spent the weekend at PFF. No, I'm just kidding.
And that his quarterback might have been unsalvageable.
Wentz? Yeah. He made Wentz look like an MVP candidate in 2017. Like that's
Doug probably a winner yesterday.
Doug definitely a winner yesterday. So if you're going to fire Flores, look, I always point out the ex-girlfriend theory that I hold for coaching hires. Is that when you fire a guy, you're probably going to look towards the opposite. Like when you break up with somebody, you break up with a tall blonde, maybe sometimes, a tall, anyway, I don't need to describe breakups. We get it. You go in the opposite direction a lot of times. You fire a defensive-minded Belichick tree guy, you're probably not going back to the Belichick tree, and you're probably going on offense. So I think Josh McDaniels is probably out. And I don't think McDaniels would do the stupid thing of going to coach directly against Bill Belichick. Just don't do that. Nick Saban learned the hard way. Brian Daboll in the division as well, it would be a little surprising. And anybody who coached for Bill Belichick probably shouldn't take this job. I think you're looking at somebody who is not a first-timer, an offensive-minded guy, or a potential splash name. Like I think Kellen Moore and Doug Peterson would be the first 2 guys that come to mind. Nathaniel Hackett is interviewing with the Jaguars. He's the Packers offensive coordinator. Look, man, you got Aaron Rodgers, so it's a little bit easier, but when you're working with him, it's certainly going to get you some interviews, and he's been around the block for a little while. I guess they could look to college for either that wouldn't be surprising if they looked to college for a non Jim Harbaugh.
So I'm laughing because I read an article that, knowing that Harbaugh probably out, that suggested Ryan Day, which was just funny.
I saw that article a few minutes ago just because I was making sure I had all my bases covered for these candidates. Was that on Sportsnaut or whatever that was.com?
It might have been. It was from like a month ago when it seems
Joe Brady was the first one.
Right. That's the same list. So Ryan, it would just be funny if Ross doesn't go with a Michigan grad, but kind of harms his college alma mater rival and pulls Ryan Day from Ohio State.
That's what I would do if I was a billionaire NFL owner. I would hire like Mac Brown from Carolina and then fire him immediately. Wait till Carolina. I'm just kidding. Bill O'Brien was suggested in the chat. Southern Dandy said better not be Bill O'Brien. Again, I really don't think Bill O'Brien definitely would like another head coaching job, but he's with Saban in Alabama right now, and he was with Belichick before.
How far do you have to be removed from the Belichick Belichick tree to
Yeah,
be like clean.
I don't think you can have ever worked for Belichick and take the Dolphins job with and not have Belichick see it as, oh, okay.
Yeah, you can't even have been like a quality control assistant for 1 year in 2005. You're out.
Is that Doug Peterson?
No, I don't think so.
It was.
No, Doug
You're just throwing that.
yeah, just a random. I don't know who that fits, but
So Joe Judge out of the Dolphins job is what you're saying. He's not out of the Giants job yet, but yeah, I mean, like guys like Patrick Graham or Todd Bowles, defensive coordinators who, despite the Giants being bad, are certainly Dennis Allen with the Saints. I just don't know if the Dolphins will go in the defensive direction, given that Flores and Greer, had these issues, and that you don't necessarily, if you have Tua and you believe Tua needs to be developed, it makes it difficult, I think, to go in the defensive direction as a selling point to your owner. Like, I would guess that, Greer has told Stephen Ross that, Flores hates Tua. He doesn't know how to develop a quarterback. This guy, if it weren't for my players, this guy, we would have lost the locker room a long time ago, yada, yada, yada. So I think focus on offensive people, focus on offensive minds. Eric Bieniemy is somebody that could work out.
Leftwich
for sure. Yep.
And we look at Stephen Ross's head coaching hires, starting with Tony Sparano to Joe Philbin to Adam Gase, all those guys with offensive backgrounds, and then breaking the mold for Brian Flores. And I remember the conversations in 2019 we had with Brady Quinn when that was the Cliff Kingsbury, Zach Taylor, Matt LaFleur year, where the Dolphins kind of broke the mold that year by not going the friend of Sean McVay, offensive genius protege route.
That's
and
right.
It was Flores and Fangio that year that kind of broke that mold. But 3 of Stephen Ross's 4 head coaching hires have been from the offensive side of the ball. So you think they go back there?
They had Dan Campbell in the house, and they let him go. They let Man Campbell go. Went 5-7 after Joe Philbin was fired midseason. Man, they have really had some interim coaches since Ross got there. So they fired Sparano midseason in 2011. Todd Bowles took over as interim, went 2-1. Hired Joe Philbin. They had Todd Bowles and Dan Campbell just right there. They're bad at this. I see that, and that the fact that they are bad at this, and it's kind of an attractive job, although the division is really, really hard. Like, the Pats are still there. The Bills are look like they're going to be good for quite some time. And I mean, the Jets are at least potentially functional.
Two free spots.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. And then the fact that you got to go, you have 3 years and you have to make the playoffs, and that's not unusual for NFL coaching jobs, but you got to go better. I don't know. How do you do better than what Brian Flores did in Miami, given where this team has been for the last 25, 30 years? It's very surprising.
And I'll bring it up again. They did give up their first round pick to the Eagles, so they don't have that, which turned into 15 overall, but they do have the 22nd overall pick from the 49ers.
Well, currently this 22nd. If my Niners, right. Currently 22nd. If the Niners go on a playoff run, that could be in theory,
turn into 30.
32, even, Debo. Wouldn't that be? That would be exciting for my wallet. The Dolphins, by the way, were dead last in scoring defense in 2019, 6th in 2020, and 16th in 2021. So the defense dramatically improved. Fell back a little bit this year, but that was probably always going to happen. I definitely have questions about what the Dolphins are doing, and Dolphins fans should have questions as well. Mike Zimmer out in Minnesota, along with Rick Spielman, the GM. I don't think that Zimmer was surprising. Like, I think it has sort of been building up for quite some time. Spielman, a little shocking though, right?
Yeah. I've kind of adopted the Vikings as my second team this season. Everybody go listen to the All Things Covered podcast. Right. And I feel very in tune with that fan base. And it was inevitable. Mike Zimmer, taking pictures after the game yesterday, which isn't a Mike Zimmer thing to do, sitting on the sideline, soaking it in. after that win at US Bank Stadium over the Bears. So that one seemed inevitable.
Yeah.
I think appreciated by that Vikings fan base. But once you get to 8 years and only 3 playoff appearances, obviously,
Yes. They won the division twice. He went 72, 56, and 1. So he won 56% of his games. I mean, I guess I get it. He never won. His worst season was 2020 when they went 7-9. Went 8-9 this year. He's a 65-year-old grumpster who is great at coaching defense. And I think Rick Spielman's actually done a pretty good job of acquiring talent, but I do believe if you're gonna fire Zimmer, it's best to pull the plug on Spielman too, because the personnel had sort of struggled. Like the defensive personnel hadn't kept up with the lofty standards that they'd established from like 2017.
Yeah, and they had massive injuries. Their best defensive player, Daniil Hunter, went out early this year, missed all of 2020. Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks have been in and out of the lineup. So they have dealt with injuries, but you're right. And for me, I kind of compare Zimmer in a sense without the same level of success as Andy Reid. But if you're somewhere for that period of time, and Andy Reid was 14 years, but he got to multiple NFC championship games and a Super Bowl, you're just at that point in this day and age where 8 years is enough of a sample size where you're not getting more of a chance if you at least don't make a Super Bowl appearance. Kind of got close in 2017. Another team thwarted their opportunity there, but
God, I forgot about that. They slaughtered them in Philly that year too.
38-7.
Is that the NFC title game?
Yeah.
It was a pick six, like to start the game, and just a blowout ensued.
Patrick Robinson. That was post Minneapolis Miracle. So, Vikings are in this high. People think they may be the team of destiny going up against Nick Foles that year. And that's the farthest that Mike Zimmer ever got in the playoffs.
Way to actually tie it back to the Vikings in a. I thought you were about to do a 2017 oral history of the.
No, I was just
Eagles.
Bringing up that was the best team they had with Case Keenum, and the fact that they bring in this high paid quarterback, what was it, $84 million guaranteed for Kirk Cousins, and have not made the playoffs in the past 2 seasons. I'm not shocked at all by the Zimmer news.
I'm not shocked by it. I mean, look, this happens all the time. I think for Vikings fans, their take is sort of that they're not happy being above average, and that's okay. Like, they want to be great. As an NC State fan who catches crap from the national media, they're like, "Oh, like, what do you expect? What do you expect? You win 8 games, should be happy with it." Listen, no, like, nobody has to be happy with being above average. Like, you can want your team to be great and to win titles. Like, that's okay. And I don't think I like Mike Zimmer as a head coach a lot. I think he's a good coach. But I also I like Pete Carroll. I think Pete Carroll's a really good head coach, but I don't think that it is going to be easy to be great with Mike Zimmer or Pete Carroll unless you have just an elite level quarterback. And we've seen that, Russell Wilson has allowed the Seahawks to be great at times. Kirk Cousins in that. Now, what gets interesting here, Debo, is you're now looking for a new GM in a place that hadn't had Rick Spielman's been there. Oh, time. A long time. Like, he's been there since he's been there since 2006. He was hired away from the Miami Dolphins, I believe.
Yep.
And he came into the Vikings as his official title. He wasn't the GM until 2012. Right. He was the VP of player personnel and de facto general manager, which I guess is a title, from 2006 to 2011. So you're talking about an organization that has been run, he's been an exec VP and GM since 2014. He has essentially run this organization from a football operation standpoint since 2006. There is going to be some culture shock with whoever is brought in to be the GM. And the other thing, so that's not necessarily, that's not a bad part. You're at least coming into a place that has, in theory, some stability built into it because one person has been running it for that long. But you're also the issue for me with the Vikings GM job and the coach job is that Kirk Cousins is essentially is on a 1-year deal. So what does ownership want to do with Kirk Cousins? Are they over it, or do they want a GM and a coach who are willing to build around Kirk Cousins? Because that's possible, and that will make it more difficult. Having Kirk Cousins on a 1-year deal with no clear plan at quarterback past that 1 year is going to make it make it more difficult to find a GM and a coaching pairing that will want to make it work. Now,
and Mike Zimmer wanted to stay as far as possible away from third-round pick Kellen Mond. We saw the clip, not particularly.
Yeah.
So didn't get a look at him. Kirk Cousins has expressed, as some other quarterbacks do, I'd like to spend the rest of my career in Minnesota.
Yeah, everybody says
it's not going to be up to him. It's up to this new regime.
Yeah. Be very curious. And we don't see, here's the thing about this too. The Wilf family, and they said, this morning we met with Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer to notify them we'll be moving in a different direction at the general manager and head coach position in 2022. We appreciate blah, 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 blah. We don't have, with the Dolphins, Stephen Ross is doing this every 2 or 3 years, right? With the Jets, the Johnsons are bungling some coaching search and some GM search every 2 or 3 years. We don't really have a good idea of what the Vikings will do because, again, not only has Spielman been there for a long time, Zimmer's been there since 2014. Zimmer,
one of the longest tenured in the NFL.
Probably top. He's been there probably top 5. No, Belichick, Peyton, Tomlin, Reed.
Reed's been there since 2014 as well.
Yeah, he was in the same class as Andy Reid, right?
Was the longest tenured coach not to reach a Super Bowl. That's a stat that's thrown around often.
Oh. All right, so the guy who slides into his spot as the longest tenured head coach. So here's the big.
It's going to be more recent than we think.
It is. It's much more recent than you think. It's Belichick, Peyton, Tomlin, Harbaugh, Pete Carroll, Andy Reid are the guys who are, the Super Bowl winning head coaches who are locked into those things. The next guy,
is it it's not Frank Reich.
That's close. 1 year off. It's actually 3 guys. McDermott, McVay, and Shanahan from 2017. So there's no coach remaining from 14, 15, 16 who were hired in those stretches, including your boy Doug.
Yeah,
Cliff Kingsbury's like the 10th longest tenured head coach. Zach Taylor. God, this business is nuts.
And the Vikings, like you said, did have some stability. Just 3 coaches in the Wilf era since 2005. 2 of them were off the Andy Reid coaching tree with Brad Childress and Leslie Frazier. 1 offense, 1 defense there. Went from Frazier to Zimmer, both defensive-minded guys. Is that something you think a trend that continues here, knowing that Spielman also out?
Well, and again, this, you look at how the Vikings handled the last coaching search. Spielman would have hired Leslie Frazier too.
Yes.
God, man, what a 2006 to 2021 is quite a run as an NFL GM. It sucks Rick Spielman's gone. You give the dude credit for lasting that long, and any dude who lasts that long in an organization, that's a really long time. I would guess because of the way that they did the last 2 coaching searches with Spielman conducting them and hiring him and running by Ziggy Wilf, that this is just a hunch. I would guess that they go out and hire a GM first and allow that GM to pick the coaching candidate, because that just, it's if that's sort of how you've done things if that's your comfort level, unless Jim Harbaugh, or Jim Harbaugh's a bad example, unless there's some just big head coach who is willing to take the Vikings job, but sort of like Andy Reid with John Dorsey. And our friend, I was reading it, I'd forgotten about this, but Scott Pioli was with the Chiefs when Andy Reid got hired, and he stepped away knowing that Andy Reid wanted to bring in his own guy. So if you have somebody with that cachet, and I don't know that there's necessarily anybody out there, Doug Peterson does not count.
That wasn't that head shake.
Okay, who are you thinking? Is there somebody I'm missing?
No, I'm trying to think right now.
So
Drop some names in the chat for who you think should be the next Vikings coach.
I think that they probably end up going with a offensive guy. So like Josh McDaniels might be someone who could command the GM thing. If Josh McDaniels like, look, I will come, but I want, and so that's where it gets tricky. Do the Vikings, are they willing, or they have candidates in mind that they would be willing to let pick the GM, or are they definitely going to go? I think they probably go find a GM and then let that GM do the head coaching search. Now, part of the problem with that is you have to act very, very quickly with your GM because, you know, you don't want to lose an opportunity to hire some good coaching candidates who are out there, although the fairly uninspiring, larger group. I mean, it's retreads and the usual coordinators who are popping up. And, you also have to look, man. I mean, it's January 10th. Combine drafting that far away. You got to get the people in place.
Move.
So yeah, you got to move kind of quick.
And
so
we'll rank the vacancies later on tonight with a full cast of Super Friends. Tune in at 5 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. But this has to be towards the top of the list. You look at the offense, and you have the best wide receiver in NFL history through 2 seasons.
Yep.
You have, I think, inarguably, when healthy, a top 3 running back in the NFL. Adam Thielen remains a touchdown machine into his 30s, and the quarterback is more than competent.
If you're a head coaching candidate and you're thinking, okay, because again, like, look, Brian Flores got fired despite going above 500 2 years in a row because he didn't make the playoffs. If there's a team out there, you're looking at these jobs where you feel like you can make the playoffs in 2022, the Vikings are at the top of the list. Because even you don't know what the hell's going to happen with Cousins after 2022, and you'll talk. Coaching candidates will talk to the GM about it. But you come in with the offensive pieces you described. They've invested a lot in the offensive line, and enough on defense where you can do some damage. A good a offensive minded head coach can get enough out of the Vikings where you have to feel like that team can be a playoff caliber roster in 2022. And you make
the this year. There's no reason they should have missed the playoffs. That was an embarrassment, and I think one of the biggest reasons. Probably. If the outcomes were shaded just a little differently, or they happened differently, maybe Zimmer's back. But you lose on Sunday Night Football to the Cowboys and Cooper Rush. You allow the Lions and the Fighting Dan Campbells to win their first game of the season by driving down the field and hitting a last-second play.
Yep.
Kirk Cousins goes out with COVID at the end of the year. But this is the most insane team to me in the NFL. We saw craziness between the Chargers and Raiders on Sunday Night Football. It was like that all season long for the Vikings. They 14 to 17 games come down to one score, and there was 14 of the first 15. They always played up or down to competition, and just a really roller coaster experience for Vikings fans. And then you kind of look at that Rick Spielman era. This team has dealt with some difficult losses. This fan base, I don't want to say tortured, but they're close to
tortured.
it. You want to talk about 2009 conference championship versus the Saints, overtime, super close. They probably would have beat the Colts that year. The Blair Walsh kick, Seahawks in 2015.
Look at you, a passionate Vikings fan.
I've developed this compassion because I was once there a couple years ago. Yeah. And now, I see these frustrations from the Vikings fans, and it's mounting. So
14 of 17 games, 1-score games. What was it? 4 of their first 6 games or something like that were decided on the final play of the game. That's sort of I think you hit the nail on the head there. If you're the owner and you're watching your team and your team is like, you're like having, it's like literally causing you like heart issues. And I'm not saying that Ziggy Wolf is dealing with it, but like, what I mean? That would be pretty stressful and pretty annoying if week in and week out, your team was acting like a crazy pants. There's no consistency. It doesn't feel, well coached. It doesn't feel like you can put teams away. That's probably, one of the reasons why they ultimately decided to move on and to try and reboot. 3 games in overtime, went 1-2 in those games. As you mentioned, lost to the Lions, almost lost to the Lions twice.
Through 13 weeks, they had a 7+ point lead in every game and had a losing record at that point. It's just not adding up. So yes, the numbers for Jefferson were great. Cook, great when healthy, but all these individual stats didn't add up to a consistent enough offense. And you look at Cousins and you're like, wow, that guy, just looking at the stat sheet, if you didn't watch football this year, but just looked at he's a top 5 MVP guy, just looking at purely the numbers. And that's the furthest thing from the truth of what this team experienced this year. 10 wins was easily within grasp, should be in the playoffs right now, are not. So,
and defense had fallen off a cliff. 19.3 points per game allowed in 2014 to 2019, 27.1 points per game allowed the last 2 years. Certainly.
Yeah, and if that's Zimmer's bread and butter.
Yeah. If you're Mike Zimmer and your defense is bad, you're not going to stick around. I would say that Zimmer, just like Mike Zimmer and Brian Flores, decent chances they become head coaching candidate or head coaches again in 2022. Maybe the vacancies just don't line up because we're seeing all these defensive coaches fired. So it's tough to be like, well, yes, we fired Vic Fangio, but here's Mike Zimmer. That's not a great sell to your fan base.
And Zimmer, 65 years old, if he probably wants to keep coaching, I think, from what we believe, but
he'd be a defensive coordinator. He will be a defensive coordinator next year. Like Vic Fangio and Mike Zimmer will be. Well, and we'll get to all those. Yeah, Mike Zimmer will be either a head coach or a defensive coordinator in the NFL in 2022, unless he just wants to take a year off to hang with his Instagram model girlfriend that Ryan Wilson is oddly.
Ryan Wilson is now following on Instagram, confirmed.
Oh, you confirmed it? Woo-hoo-hoo! Spicy little news nugget on Monday morning. Matt Nagy out in Chicago, and Bears fans should be thrilled, not because Matt Nagy got fired, but because along with Matt Nagy, Ryan Pace was shown the door as well. There are some Bears fans out there who believe that Ryan Pace is a good GM. I actually think that more of what was happening in Chicago in terms of the problems is related to Ryan Pace and not Matt Nagy. Ryan Pace hired John Fox. He hired Matt Nagy. He drafted Mitchell Trubisky, in a class with Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes. And he also traded up to draft Justin Fields, signed my boy Mike Glennon, signed Andy Dalton. There's a whole lot of
case in your mind for these Bears fans. I know you don't feel this way, but what is the case that they're making where?
Right. It's just like crazy Twitter. It might be Ryan Pace burners, honestly. It's, like I saw somebody was yelling at Mike Silver. Mike Silver quote tweeted it. That's how I saw it. But he was like, Ryan Pace is a top 10 GM. It's like, what? Like on what planet do you lead you to believe, what planet do you reside on that leads you to believe that Ryan Pace is a top 10 GM? I don't get that. The Bears have gone. They went 12-4 in Matt Nagy's first year, but prior to that, and I believe, because oh my God, Ryan Pace gave John Fox 3 years, 6-10, 3-13, 5-11, 12-4, 8-8, 8-8, 6-11. This roster is sort of similar to the Vikings in the sense that you might have a quarterback. We don't know. Certainly a more attractive job because of Justin Fields. If you're a coach who believes that Justin Fields can be an elite level NFL quarterback, this is a very attractive job. I think there are still questions about Justin Fields. He fell in the draft for a reason. This team, but this roster is not as good. Like people having their minds that the Bears have a good roster. Allen Robinson's going to be gone, and what a disaster season for him this past year. Darnell Mooney's nice. Cole Kmet, a decent little piece. There are some offensive line pieces in place, but it's not a great offensive line. David Montgomery's a fine running back. I don't think you're going to pay him though. And Andre Castile in the chat says, hell no, Vikings job very much more attractive than the Bears. Maybe so. I think it depends on it depends on your feelings about Justin Fields. Right?
Like you said, the immediate ability for the Vikings to make the playoffs in 2022 might be greater, but I think if you're looking at a long-term ceiling, you go with the Bears.
If you believe
feel decent about Justin Fields.
If you like Justin Fields, then the Bears job is a more attractive long-term position than the Vikings job. Just
Do you like
because
Justin Fields?
do I like Justin Fields? I like Justin Fields.
I like him too.
I don't know if I love Justin Fields, but I like Justin Fields.
You hated him this time last year.
I wasn't a big Fields guy, but then he grew on me in the draft process, and now I'm like in a weird spot where I kind of like him. It's bizarre. Yeah, I mean, the Bears have had one good season, and they snuck into the playoffs at 8-8 in 2020. I mean, Matt Nagy went to the playoff twice in 4 years and got fired. what are you supposed to do in this league?
I forget about last year. Like, it's just wild to me that team snuck in last year.
I mean, Matt Nagy finished 34-31. So he had a winning record, went to the playoffs twice, and he got fired for it. I don't know what you're supposed to do. I mean, this is a disaster season for the Bears, and they still went 6-11. I mean, they were terrible. I'm not saying that they're good.
No tweets yet from Bleep. It's early out there, Mountain Time Zone. Yeah. I'm trying to get a little reaction from our old friend Sean, but nothing yet.
The Bears' offense was really the problem, though, because Matt Nagy, former offensive coordinator for Andy Reid, team went, since 2019, they ranked 27th in points per game, 28th in yards per game, 31st in big plays, and 28th in passer rating. Defense had gone from first in the NFL in terms of points allowed in 2018 under Nagy. When they went 12-4. I mean, we talk about his good resume, but it's sort of like Zimmer in the sense that it's great that you are winning games, but it feels like a mirage with Nagy to a degree because the offense has never been good, despite having 2 first-round quarterbacks and multiple free agent signings. I'm not saying that the quarterbacks were the answer or anything like that, but my point is just, he's been, in theory, given the tools to make it work. The offenses have never been good, and the defense was already good in place when he showed up because of the Khalil Mack trade. And
that was the first season.
Right.
Mack comes the summer of Nagy's first year. So I was going to, that 2018 year, do we give a little bit more credit to Ryan Pace just for that year to get them to that 12-4?
Yeah. Or Vic Fangio. I mean, the defense, since Vic Fangio left, right? The defense was first in 2018 in terms of points per game allowed, 4th in 2019. And Fangio.
That's probably the answer right there. Vic Fangio, he leaves the next year for Denver. They drop off a cliff.
Yep. Because Fangio was in Denver was he in Denver for only
3 years? Yeah.
3 years. Yeah. So basically they were able to, and Chuck Pagano came in after Fangio, kind of held it together in 2019. And then now the defense is middling. And if you have a offensive minded head coach who is bald and wears a visor on the sidelines, which is still a big bugaboo with mine, like just wear a hat, bro. If your defense that was propped up by coordinators falls off a cliff and is just average, and you can't get the offense to work, and you're an offensive minded head coach, then it's just not gonna happen. I think Bears fans are irrational about who they might get next. Like, I'm in a chat with some Bears fans. Do you want to get? I want you to guess. Like there's a splash name they think that they can get, and I've seen this from other Bears fans out there. Who do you want to have a guess about who? And you can guess in the chat if you want to, about who Bears fans think that they're going to get. It's insane.
I mean, you're setting it up. I'm led to believe that it's someone currently employed by another team. Is it like a Tomlin?
You are all no. It is Mike Tomlin was in it. Mike Tomlin and Sean Payton were the names that I saw thrown out. Grow up. You're not. I mean, maybe they could trade 2 first-round picks, which they had 2 of them, by the way. Or no, they traded. They don't have any first-round picks. You're not. Yeah, what am I talking about? The Giants have 2. You're not getting Sean Payton. Sean Payton just won. Sean Payton is the king of the castle in New Orleans and just won 9 games with the Taysom Hill and Trevor Siemian and Jameis Winston. Like, no, you're not. I mean, throw it in my face if I'm wrong.
You're much more likely to get someone like a Pat Fitzgerald than a Sean Payton.
Sean Payton. Sean Payton went to college in Chicago. Come home, Sean. It's like, no, Sean Izzo. He lives in the greatest city in America. He runs the organization because the GM is too busy. Like the owner just died. His wife's in charge. She's letting Sean Payton do whatever he wants. Mickey Loomis is running the freaking Pelicans. Like, Sean Payton runs the Saints. He's not going anywhere. Why would he go to Chicago?
Yeah, if he didn't make that jump when we talked about it a little bit 2 years ago to Dallas before they hired Mike McCarthy, I don't think he's taking this situation 2 years later. I know he doesn't have Drew Brees anymore, and Justin Fields, for someone like Sean Payton, is an attractive young quarterback, but not happening.
It's way more likely that a stud free agent quarterback, or a quarterback who wants a trade, whether it's a Rodgers or Russ, and I don't think Rodgers wants to trade anymore, but Russell Wilson. It's way more likely that Russell Wilson ends up in New Orleans than it is that Sean Payton ends up in Chicago. And the idea that the Steelers don't move on from coaches. Mike Tomlin just made the playoffs, guys, with the crusty old corpse of Ben Roethlisberger.
That situation would be like if Tomlin wants a new challenge, so to say, but that's not happening either. Like, I know the Steelers aren't going to get rid of it, so the path to the Bears is Tomlin wanting something new, but I don't see that.
Why would he's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I've been in Pittsburgh for, I mean, what do we say? He's been in Pittsburgh since, he's the third. Sean Payton's the second longest tenured. He's been in New Orleans since 2006. Tomlin's been in Pittsburgh since 2007. Both guys have around 63% win percentages. They have reasonable paths to the playoffs every year. They
probably future Hall of Famers if we want to bring up Hall of Fame.
Future Hall of Famers, yeah. I mean, Sean Payton has 7 NFC South titles, has been to the playoffs 9 times. Tomlin's been to the playoffs 10 times and has 7 AFC North titles. He's won the AFC twice and has a Super Bowl. These guys are good. What are you doing, Bears fans? I think the biggest case for a splash hire for the Bears, and I'm not suggesting that this is the way to go, and I know I keep bringing his name up, but he's the one who put his name out there, is Jim Harbaugh. And Bears fans I think he's a good fit for Chicago. I think it was Kyle Brandt on Good Morning Football. It's like, everybody settle down. And Kyle's a Bears fan, although he's like also an Eagles fan and a Bills fan now. Kyle's very good at endearing himself to fan bases. Great, very, very good hype man. Anyway, he pointed out that Harbaugh is like a middling quarterback with the Bears. He's not like he's this, like he was a Michigan legend. He's not necessarily a Chicago Bears legend, but the sort of mentality that the identity that the Bears have as, smash mouth, cold weather, play defense, hard, blue collar. It fits with Jim Harbaugh. And I'm not saying that should be the mentality that they go with. And Jim Harbaugh, somebody asked in the chat, why would Harbaugh go to the Bears over the Raiders? Well, the Raiders' job isn't open, and the Raiders are in the playoffs.
Might not be open.
I know. I mean, I don't know that. The Raiders' job is.
The Raiders are going to win in Wild Card Weekend. We know that.
Smacking those Bengals. That's right, baby.
Reach isn't here. We can say whatever we want.
Oh, we missed. I've got like coaching stuff on the brain. I couldn't picture the
remember their matchup.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think that the Harbaugh to the Raiders, if Harbaugh has a choice between the Raiders and the Bears, then maybe the answer is the Raiders. That's okay. But
are there other situations? We brought him up a couple of times already, but Harbaugh, those two probably make the most sense. I mean, we got Jacksonville open. We know it's probably not going to be Miami at this point if Stephen Ross is telling the truth.
I mean, if Harbaugh is coming back to the NFL,
he's not going to Denver.
No, it's either Oakland. It's either Las Vegas or Chicago, I think. So and for the Bears, the question is, can you wait? Can you wait out? Like, can the Bears wait out the Raiders? Because I think you may have to do that because Harbaugh is going to want a bidding war. He's not a dummy, and he's in a great position because he can just sit at Michigan. He's told recruits that he will listen to the NFL teams. So if you're Harbaugh, and by the way, this could all be a giant ploy to reverse engineer the pay cut that he took last year coming into this season, where he gets Michigan just to pony up cash because there's 2 NFL teams interested in him. He's telling
them. Worst case for him, he gets that contract torn up and redone.
Yep, and he gets job security at Michigan that he didn't have coming into 2021.
And he can revisit the NFL next year or the year after that.
Somebody asked about Eric Bieniemy to the Bears. Makes a ton of sense, except you can't hire the guy who replaced Matt Nagy to replace Matt Nagy.
It's the same thing as, no
Belichick
not the same side of the ball, but no McDaniels to the Dolphins, no Patriots disciples to the Dolphins. You're not going to take Andy Reid tree again.
You just can't. You can't. Who was it? It was like could the Eagles draft? Who did we say they couldn't draft?
Trey Lance.
Trey Lance. Yeah, like you just can't do it.
But a little bit removed. 7-8 years removed at this point. Doug.
I think Doug Peterson can make a lot of sense in Chicago. Yeah, I know we just said that he can't hire. It's
far enough removed.
I don't consider Doug Peterson like Bieniemy is currently employed by Andy Reid and took the job, replaced Matt Nagy. Now Nagy replaced Doug Peterson. I do think that you can. I think that Peterson is an acceptable hire. The Bears, God Almighty, we're talking about another job that Dave Wannstedt held down for like 5 or 10 years, just like the Dolphins. So Ditka left in 92. And since then, they've had Wannstedt for 5 years, Dick Duran for 4 years or so. Lovie Smith had it for 8 years. Mark Trestman, boy, that was a hot minute with Mark Trestman. Remember when Mark Trestman had Josh McCown win an NFC Player of the Week at one point. John Fox and then Matt Nagy. A very Lovie got them to the Super Bowl. I don't think Lovie was a great head coach, but he coached up defense at a time when his defensive scheme was working in the NFL.
With Rex Grossman. Yeah.
Got him the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman. Like that, throw a guy a bone. The Tampa 2 ain't working, ain't cutting anymore. But, Trestman, Fox, Nagy is wildly uninspiring. So you sort of wonder, would they want to, I don't know that you definitely go ex-girlfriend theory here and go back to defense.
A break away from the ex-girlfriend theory?
Yeah, I think because you have Fields and because Nagy only had him for 1 year. And the other question is, just like with the Vikings, how will the Bears handle the GM situation? Because based on how things went in San Francisco with Harbaugh at the end with Trent Baalke, who now is going to be doing the same thing in Jacksonville. I just realized I have a Radiohead in like 10 minutes. That I think with Harbaugh, he would want to, if you hired Harbaugh, he would want to bring in his own GM, or at least have work with the organization to find a GM that he is compatible with. And I actually think if you're the Bears, that's a smart move because of Harbaugh's personality. I also think there's a chance that, even though I know I said he doesn't have the cachet for this, that Doug Peterson, because of how things went with Howie Roseman, may attempt to do the same thing in a less abrasive way with a team like the Bears, where he says, look, I'm interested in the job. Look what I got out of Carson Wentz. You know what I can get out of Justin Fields, man? I can make this kid fly. But he says, I had a bad experience with Howie Roseman. I don't want to speak ill of coworkers, but I just want you to know, I would love to help find a GM candidate who could work. And I think at that point, if you're Doug Peterson, you point to what Andy Reid did with John Dorsey. And I know Dorsey eventually got fired, but you say, look, Andy's my mentor. He's told me this is the best way for organizations to make it work. Of course, then you bring up Andy Reid and the Matt Nagy thing. So I don't know. Doug Peterson could make sense. I think Doug Peterson or Jim Harbaugh make a lot of sense for Chicago.
Let me run through just a couple names. You tell me if you would give them an interview if you're the Bears. Josh McDaniels.
Absolutely. McDaniels would make a lot of sense.
Brian Daboll.
Absolutely. Yeah. Blooms off the rose a little bit. But I mean, it's not like, Brian, Josh Allen's freaking awesome. And he's a toolsy, raw quarterback, sort of, a little bit of, like Fields. So, yeah.
Nathaniel Hackett in the division. You staying away from that? Is Hackett staying away from that?
I'm not. If I'm Nathaniel Hackett and I have a pretty good idea of what, why is somebody accusing us of Justin Fields hate in the chat? What are you talking about, Charles?
They're looking at tweets from 2021.
I know. I guess so.
January 2021.
Maybe, yeah. If I'm Hackett, I have a pretty good idea of what Aaron Rodgers plans to do. I think just because of my close proximity to him, you're working with him constantly over the last, several years, but certainly over the last year. I think if Aaron Rodgers is staying, you have a good idea about it. And if Aaron Rodgers is staying, you shouldn't take a job in the division with Aaron Rodgers. It's begging to get fired very quickly.
Yeah. And that, I think there's a history of that. When it does happen, it doesn't last very long. Kellen Moore, Leftwich, we'll throw them in a bucket together. Greg Roman. And then if you do want to consider defense, there's options out there. They're not going to bring Fangio back, their last defensive coordinator, as their new head coach. Zimmer, same kind of, in theory, fired from a division rival. That's not going to happen. Peyton, Tomlin, count that out. Todd Bowles, Gerard Mayo get thrown around a lot. This is a situation that Flores could make sense, or no? I know you've been leaning offense, but
Flores makes a lot of sense here. Also, you got to figure out the GM. I mean, again, like what's the GM situation? Flores, like Doug Peterson, like Jim Harbaugh, may want to say, "Hey, look, I went about 500 with the freaking Dolphins, and went 4-2 against Belichick, and I got fired because my GM didn't like me, and like we had a power struggle. So, I'll listen, but I need to have some input in who we're going to hire as the GM, or I don't want, I don't want you guys just to hire me and then toss a GM in there. I think that's if you've been burnt like that, you're probably going to ask for, if you have that cachet, you're going to ask for that. Yes, I think that Brian Flores would make a lot of sense. I'm trying to think who else for the Bears. Byron Leftwich, sure, that would make sense. Kellen Moore.
I mean, there's Dan Quinn, Matt Eberflus, these defensive guys, but if you're leaning the other way, then it might be an OC. We haven't talked about any of these like out of the blue, Joe Judge type hires, and maybe there's a reason for that, where we're like pulling from special teams.
Do we want to touch very quickly on the names who, or would you just want to leave the names who may be fired in the future?
Why is he not fired yet? Why is Mr. Clown Show himself still employed this morning?
The Joe Judge is, according to a report that just came out, going to meet Dan Mullen. That's a name. That's actually not
expect to see that.
I mean, free agent coach Dan Mullen is fired but again, crazy business. Go look at Dan Mullen's record at Florida. Like, he was in the SEC championship game last year. They fired him midseason. It's wild how the idea that somebody can keep if you keep a coaching job for 10 plus years, you're like, you've done an incredible job. Or you're trying to think about or you're Mike Zimmer, I guess. Joe Judge reportedly meeting with Giants players, according to Mike Garafolo and Ian Rappaport of NFL Media, with a quote, eye to the future, but also has not met with the ownership yet. So we'll see what comes out of that. I don't think that Matt Rule is definitely safe yet either. I'm trying to think who else.
I'll just say, absolute music to my ears as an Eagles fan if they retain Joe Judge.
You want Joe Judge there as long as humanly possible. If you're an Eagles fan.
I want it McAdoo to stay. I want it Shermer to stay, but I really want Joe Judge to stay around.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the Joe Judge is the biggest clown show going. So yeah, if you're an Eagles fan, if you're a Washington football team fan, if you're a Cowboys fan, you want Joe Judge in place as long as humanly possible. All right, that'll do it for us.
We will rank the vacancies, talk more rumors. I think more names are going to pop up in some of these searches for teams that have been firing their coaches this morning. So 5:00 with the Super Friends will be live on YouTube. Maybe before then, but definitely 5:00. So come check us out.
All right, Tebow, as always, excellent work. We will be back at 5:00 p.m. sharp on the YouTubes. Hit that alert button, hit the subscribe button. You will get notified when we go live. Little bell right there in the chat. Hit the like button while you're at it. If you're listening to the podcast in audio forms, make sure and Give us that 5-star rating on Spotify. Thanks everybody for hanging out, for listening, for watching. We will talk to you guys later.